All right, so this is Zonovan Compact Bible Dictionary, and we're going to look up the definition of Christian because there are a lot of people who believe that who we know today as Christ said that there's no historical proof of him. So what we're going to do is first we're going to get the definition of Christian, and then we're going to go into some records that actually speaks about who we call today Christ. Because you get people to say that there's no historical proof on him outside of the Bible, and they say he was invented at the Council of Nicaea. Now, Zonovan Compact Bible Dictionary says the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. Okay, so disciples means student, learner, or follower. Say that they were called Christians first in Antioch. And then it gives the scripture Acts 11, which is really Acts 11:26. It says a designation probably coming from the populace, meaning what? The population of people. It also says who were well known for their invention of what? Nicknames. So understand that the disciples, right? The students were known for their invention of what we know today as they were invented for nicknames, and these people in Antioch called the disciples Christian. Okay, now a little bit about who you know as Tacitus, and who was a Roman senator and a historian, and Nero. I want to read a little bit about them. For those you already know, Nero was the emperor that was known for persecuting the followers of Christ and burned down and blamed it on the Christians that they had burned down the city of Rome as an excuse to persecute them as well. But we know that that was a lie. So for those of you who already know about Nero, I'm sure you already know this. Those who know about Emperor Nero. But let's read a little bit about him. This is from a book called Imperial Rome, page 182. And I'm also on page 183 about Tacitus as well. So it says Nero, all right? It says a most depraved emperor, okay? It says he began the mass persecution of Christians. Now remember, we just read earlier those that follow Christ were called Christians. Now this was before the Council of Nicaea, so this is before what many people know today as Christianity. It says blaming them for the burning of Rome. See that? They got blamed. Treating senators like slaves. He put them in arenas with wild beasts. All right. Now we're going to talk about that a little later as well. All right, but Tacitus on page 183, it says the greatest of the Roman historians silenced during the despotic reign of Domitian. Tacitus later wrote his exhaustive histories. Okay, he wrote his exhaustive histories and annals, meaning records of and records or annals. One of his aims as an historian, he said, all right, was to hold out the reprobation of posterity as a terror to evil words and deeds. So we're going to read one of the accounts that Cornelius Tacitus wrote. All right, this is from a book called The Annals of Imperial Rome. Now, in this book, let's read about him. Well, let's look on the back first, so you can kind of get a understanding what it's about, to show that this has nothing to do with the Bible at all. It says one of the most important historical records from classical antiquity. The Annals of Imperial Rome chronicles the history of the Roman Empire. All right, not about the Bible, but of the Roman Empire. All right, from the reign of Tiberius. Now we all know who Tiberius Caesar is, right? It says from the reign of Tiberius beginning in 14 AD to the reign of who? Nero. Now remember, he was the Roman emperor. So this records the early Roman Empire from the ruling of Tiberius Caesar all the way to Emperor Nero, all right, which ended in 66 AD. All right. Now Nero was the adopted son of Claudius Caesar, all right, which we'll be learning about today as well. But anyway, it says, written by Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman senator during the 2nd century AD. The records or annals of Imperial Rome is a detailed first-hand account of the early Roman Empire. So it's a detailed first-hand account. Okay. Then it says, presented in this volume is the classic translation of Alfred John Church and William Jacobson Broderick. Okay, so now we kind of got a little understanding on what we're about to be getting off into. All right, it has nothing to do with the Bible, but a detailed first-hand account of the early Roman Empire. Okay, so with that being said, moving forward, this is again for those of you all who say that there is no historical proof of Christ. All right, so remember this is court. All right, so for those of you who say Christ was invented and he never existed, right, and he was created at the Council of Nicaea, right, you're going to have to explain why a Roman senator would take the time out to lie on his enemy. Rome is one of the greatest empires to ever stand. The records in this book dates back before Christianity. All right, this senator wrote about him 200 years before the Council of Nicaea. All right. Now, the Romans kept record of their history, as we know, right? Such as the book I brought out earlier, Imperial Rome, and this book, The Annals of Imperial Rome, that I'm about to bring out. All right. So they gave a account of their history and things that happened in their time. The crucifixion of Christ is just something that they actually kept record of. So for all you non-Christ believers, have to explain why an enemy of Christ wrote about it during the time that it was the greatest empire standing in that time. This wasn't just any old person. This was a Roman senator making a first-hand detailed account of events that took place during the Roman Empire. And the crucifixion of Christ is just one thing that happened. Again, this senator didn't follow Christ. He didn't consider Christ as his friend. Nor did he or nor the Romans follow the teachings of what we know today as the Bible, as the Bible also confirms as well. So why would Cornelius Tacitus make this up? All right, now this is what he says in his book. We're going to get some understanding. All right, so for those of you all who have this book, we want to go ahead and get into it, ladies and gentlemen. And also, this guy Cornelius Tacitus was a Roman senator again, and this man lived from 55 AD all the way to about 120 AD. All right. Now, so for those of you all who have this book, we're going to turn to page 216. All right. Now, it says, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero, now remember we read about that Emperor Nero, right? Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. So let's stop right there. And then you know that Emperor Nero hated them. Things that they were doing he considered to be abominable, and they were tortured. These groups of people were tortured by Emperor Nero at his hands. You see that? So this wasn't no people that he followed. Then it says Christ or Christus, from whom the name had its origin. Let's see what it said about Christ. It said he suffered the extreme penalty. So remember, the Christians got tortured. Those who were called Christians, they got tortured, but it said Christ, this man suffered the extreme penalty. But then it tell you when it happened. During the reign of Tiberius, at the hands of one of our governors or procurators, Pontius Pilate. Now don't that sound familiar? Pontius Pilate? Don't we read about him in the Bible? John chapter 18, John chapter 19? And then it say, and the most mischievous superstition does check for the moment. It says again, not only broke out in Judea, the first source of the evil. So remember, they considered this to be evil, abominable. But it says, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Then it goes on to say, accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. So that means what? If you were following Christ and you pled guilty, there was something that happened to you. You got arrested. Then it says that upon their information, and a mixed multitude was convicted. Not so much of a crime of firing of the city as of hatred against mankind. Now remember, we read earlier that Nero had blamed the who we call Christians, these followers of Christ, blamed it on them, said that they burned down Rome. And that's what he's talking about right here. All right, this is common knowledge that Nero did do that. So it says, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths, covered with the skin of beasts. They were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses. And that happened to the Messiah. It says, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when the daylight had expired. So they used them for street lights. Understand that? Okay, so for those who do not understand what you just read, for those who don't understand history, all right, we're going to go through this again and we're going to break this down a little more, all right? But first, understand who is being mentioned in this testimony. Nero is the first man he named, right? This man Nero was the 5th emperor of Rome between 54 to 68 AD, all right? Which still puts us in the time frame of this history of this imperial record book that we're reading, right? But it said Christus, aka Christ, is the second person, all right, which he named, right? Now we can pinpoint the time frame in which this man Christ walked the earth because we know that Cornelius is the author, which lived at the time that who we know as Christ would have walked the earth. The records are from 14 to 66 AD, which means that this can only be one Christ, the one of the Bible. How do we know? Because Pontius Pilate is the third person mentioned on page 216, right? Now we know it is certain that this man died in AD 37. So this also puts us in the time frame of who we call Jesus Christ, all right? Cornelius Tacitus also mentioned and confirmed that Pontius Pilate was their procurators, meaning their governors, right? Now, if you don't know what procurators mean, look it up. Now that we have a time frame, let's get a location and break this down again. Let's go back. It says, consequently, to get rid of the report, all right, emperor, all right, remember Nero, fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a group of people hated for their abominations, or class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the population of people. That's basically what you're reading. So this is clearly letting you know that these groups of people were called Christians, all right, who were called Christians, were extremely tortured. Tortured. Now we know these people who were called Christians were not followers of the Christian religion, because we all know that Christianity did not come about until 325 AD. All right, Christian was a nickname in this time. It also says that these people were hated and said that these things they did was abominable, right? So let's keep reading. It says Christ, a Christus from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Now wait a minute. This senator is saying that this man Christ, from whom the name, not religion, but whom the name had its origins, get it? Christ, Christian, right? Says Christ suffered the extreme penalty. Wow, now that's worse than the tortures that the Christians was getting, right? Because he said he suffered the extreme penalty, death penalty. That's what he's saying there. During the time that Tiberius reigned, aka ruled. So the question is, what year did Tiberius rule? That should be a question that has to be asked, right? Tiberius ruled from AD 14 to AD 37. That's just a fact. This again gives us a time frame. But again, Christ was put to death when a man named Tiberius ruled, right? Okay, so what does the Bible got to say about this? Does the Bible confirm this? Let's see. Let's turn our Bibles to Luke chapter 3 and verse 1, which reads, it says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate. Now remember, those are two people that were named in the book. Being governor of Judea. Where's Judea? Israel. Another word for Judah. And it says, and Herod. Alright? And Herod being tetrarch of Galilee. And his brother Philip, tetrarch or Iturea. And the region of Trachonitis and Lycinus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it says the tetrarch of Albaline. Now remember, Tiberius reigned from what year? 14 to 37 AD. So now we see this has to be the same Pontius Pilate who was governor. Now let's get back to the book again. Okay? It says, then the senator Cornelius Tacitus said, at the hands of one of our governors, he called him Pontius Pilate. Who do you think that is? If you read John chapter 18, verse 28 through 40, and John chapter 19, verse 1 through 16 in the Bible, it confirms that a man Christ was put to death while Pontius Pilate was governor, procreator. Now we see that the Bible is actually historical. Now remember, this senator was not a follower of Christ. The teachings of the Bible was anti-Roman. Now let's see what else he said. And it said the most mischievous, meaning evil superstition, thus check for the moment. Supernatural. Check for the moment again broke out not only in Judea, which we just read that in the Bible, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Now what does the Bible say about Christ after he died? He rose. Now we know what the sinner is talking about when he said evil superstition broke out. What else was the followers of Christ doing? Healing people, performing miracles. The sinner is confirming what happened, but remember, they didn't follow Christ. So they called it evil superstition. They also said that Judea, which is was known also as the land of Judah and Israel, right? It said was the first source of the evil. Remember, the things that the followers of Christ did was considered to be evil to the white Romans. Notice I said the white Romans because there were also black Romans as well, but that's another topic. It says, but anyway, it was against their customs. It was against their Roman law. So they confirmed that a group of people, right, who were called Christians were located in Judea and Rome as well. Now remember, if they were called Christians, then obviously they were followers of who we call Christ, as Tacitus even confirmed as well. The same man who suffered the extreme penalty, these Christians, aka Israelites, were considered to be hated. Hated. This Roman senator recorded this in the Roman public records. This Roman senator recorded this, and it's in their public records. Let that sink in. This is for people who be saying that there's no proof that who we know is Christ. They say, ain't no proof outside the Bible. We know that's a lie. But anyway, it says, well, all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So, we see the followers of Christ was getting it in after Christ died, just like he instructed them to do in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I've given you a time period and a location. Judea was in Israel, the land of Judah, and it happened in Rome, which the Bible confirms. Let us keep going, though, because remember the Roman senator states that the people who were called Christians were tortured, right? And then it said that this man Christ suffered the extreme penalty. But what else did it say? It says, accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pled guilty upon the information that this multitude was convicted, not so much of a crime of firing of the city as of hatred against mankind. And notice, if you follow Christ and confess Christ, you was locked up by the multitudes. So you see, they was locking them up, many of them at one time. Now, why would this senator make all this up? What did he have to gain from this? What does it benefit for a Roman senator to speak of some poor man from Nazareth, on how he died and his followers, knowing that he didn't even follow him or like them? This Roman senator was not a follower of Christ, so he had nothing to gain from this at all. And not to mention, he was an historian. Let's keep reading. Let's find out what happened to those who follow Christ and pleaded guilty. It says mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. And then that happened to Christ in the Bible. Then it says covered with skin of beasts. They were torn by dogs in Paris or were nailed to crosses. So we see they made a mockery out of the followers of Christ. Don't that sound familiar again? Remember, it happened to Christ. Then it said they were torn by dogs and were nailed to crosses. King David prophesied about this. And what you know is the Old Testament, Psalm 22, verse 16. It says, for dogs have compassed or surrounded me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Now, this sounds just like what the Romans did to our ancestors. Oh, and yes, these people who you call Christians were Israelites by bloodline, including Christ, who was black, of course. Let's not get that twisted, ladies and gentlemen. So, what we reading is a historical, detailed, first-hand account. Now, what did the last thing say? It says, on page 217, it says, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when the daylight had expired. So this means they used our ancestors as street lights when it got dark outside. There's no reason for a Roman senator who does not believe in Christ, who does not follow Christ, to even speak on this unless it happened. Also, when you pay attention to the dates, all of them of what you know as the New Testament wasn't even completed yet. So this is during the time of what you know as the New Testament was being compiled together. This is right before the Israelites fled out of Rome, which happened in 70 AD, when they were fleeing from the Romans. They were being persecuted. Now think about it. Would you talk bad about somebody who didn't exist? If you said you had an enemy and the people found out he never existed, how's that going to make you look? If you were a Roman seeing that you were a popular, wealthy Roman citizen, one of the greatest empires, and they talking, and they in this book is talking bad about Christ, so you know they had nothing to gain by talking bad about a poor man from Nazareth, huh? A guy that was despised and rejected among his own people. So what brownie points did he get? Huh? What brownie points does a powerful Roman citizen have to gain in making up about some poor man who we call today Christus, aka Christ, or in the Hebrew Mashiach, which means Messiah? It shows that it actually happened. Remember, if you study what we call the New Testament, you would know that the Romans was not true followers of Christ at all. They believed in a Roman god, such as people like Mithra, right? He wrote about Christ and his people, so why would an enemy write about Christ walking on water and things like that unless it actually happened? An enemy has no reason to lie on somebody who he don't even care about. Again, this book, Imperial Rome, is in no way, shape, form biblical. It's only covering the early historical accounts of the early Roman Empire. However, it still proves that Christ walked on this earth. These are the records that thousands of years ago, about 208 years before the Council of Nicaea, the Roman records lines up with what we call the Bible. Their records say Christ was put to death under the authority of Pontius Pilate, just like the Bible say. So for those of you who don't know, Pontius Pilate, right, was the judge who served under the Roman Emperor Tiberius, which is on record, is a fact. Now, a little more about this book, all right. Annals of Imperial Rome is considered to be the most important historical records from classical antiquity, right? Just like we read earlier. This book chronicles the history of the Roman Empire, from the reign of Tiberius beginning in 14 AD to the reign of Nero ending in 66 AD. Now, didn't the Council of Nicaea start 325 AD? This means the people in the Bible never followed their Christian religion. Period. It didn't even exist. The book of Revelation was completed between 90 to 96 AD. That means what? That the Bible was completed between 230 to 235 years before what we know as the Council of Nicaea. Understand? Understand that? Turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 18, verse 1 and 2. Because the next thing I'm going to go into is, we talked about Nero, and we're going to talk about Claudius. All right. Now, Nero was adopted son of Claudius Caesar. All right. And I believe Nero became emperor at the age of 16, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, it says, Acts 18, verse 1 and 2, it says, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. This is in the area of Greece. And found a certain Jew or Israelite named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, all right, which way you know is Rome today, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius, there we go, Claudius, that's the Roman emperor, Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome and came to them. So he kicked the Jews out of Rome. Now notice that Claudius Caesar, again, kicked the Jews out of Rome. But why though? Because they were causing disturbances in the city. All right, let's read Acts 16, verse 20 through 21. It says, and brought them to the magistrates or generals or governors, saying, these men being Jews do exceedingly trouble our city. Right? And then it said, and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. So notice the Israelites, who were called Christians, was getting it in. The Romans ain't like it. They taught the laws, statutes, and commandments. They taught against idolatry. They preached Christ, and the Romans didn't like that. The teaching that the Israelites taught was anti-Roman. Just like the teachers today we teach today is anti-American. Let's get another example. Let's go to Acts chapter 17, verse 7 and 8. It says, whom Jason hath received, and these all do contrary to the laws of Caesar. You see that? It said contrary to the laws of the decrees of Caesar, saying, there is another king, one Jesus. Oh, so you see that? They were confessing that Christ was king. Then it say, and they troubled the people, the rulers of the city, when they heard these things. So Claudius Caesar didn't like the fact that they were causing a disturbance in the city. He didn't like the fact that they worship another king, who we now call today Jesus. Now, if the story is true that we read about these accounts about the Israelites causing an uproar, shouldn't it be recorded in history? Of course. We're about to read the very words, all right, of those who would, of the ones who kicked the Jews out of Rome, Claudius Caesar, right? Because when you look at Acts chapter 24, it lets you know that they were turning the world upside down. All right. So, with that being said, there's a book called 12 Seasons, all right, page 195. It says, because the Jews at Rome caused contentious disturbances. Sound like what we read in the Bible, huh? This is Claudius' own words. All right, at the instigation of Christus, that's Christ, he expelled them from the city. Wow. So they were causing a contentious disturbance at the instigation of Christ, who he called Christus. And then we just read that in Acts chapter 18. If the Jews got kicked out of Rome, didn't we just read that? That they were starting trouble over Christ? who you read about in the Bible, your Bible is historical. So look, don't let these liars tell you that the Bible isn't historical. All you gotta do is read and study it, so you can get you some understanding. Because the Bible is very historical. Page 276 in his book, and 277, it says an ancient superstition was current in the east out of, now we're flipping over to 277, Judea, all right, would come to the rulers of the world. This prediction, as it later proved, referred to Roman emperors, right? But the Jews who would read it as referring to themselves rebelled after murdering their procreator. Now, here it is, Caesar, this emperor, is writing and confirming that Christ was put to death. It said after murdering their procreator. Ain't that something? Says they routed the consular governor of Syria when he came down to restore order, and captured an eagle. To crush this uprising, the Romans needed a strong army under an energetic commander who could be trusted not to abuse his powers. The choice fell on Vespasian. Now keep in mind, we're going to learn about Vespasian too, because remember, he was the one that really was persecuting our people. And if you read the book from Babylon to Timbuktu, you already know this. You already know this to be a fact. Page 278. In Judea, Vespasian consulted the god of Carmel. So you see that? That's the god he worshiped. And was given a promise that he would never be disappointed in what he planned or desired. However lofty his ambitions, also distinguished Jewish prisoner of Vespasian's, Josephus. Oh, no, you heard of Josephus, right? Look who they talking about. So clearly this man existed. Josephus by name insisted that he would soon be released by the very man who had now put him in fetters and who would then be emperor. So here it is, it's talking about Josephus. And that's something. These people, these Romans didn't worship your gods at all. They worshiped Camera, Jupiter, Mithra. Understand that. Let's continue. It says, in addition, Domitian's agents collected the tax on the Jews with a peculiar lack of mercy and took proceedings not only against those who kept their Jewish origins a secret in order to avoid the tax, but also against those who lived as Jews without professing it. As a boy, I remember once attending a crowded court where a steward had a 90-year-old man stripped to establish whether or not he had been circumcised. Why is this enemy of Christ writing about this? Huh? Why is he writing about them being taxed? Because remember, who made a law that you had to pay taxes? The Bible tells you. Let's go to Luke chapter 2 right quick. Grab Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree, meaning a law, from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed. You see that? And this was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. See that? So keep in mind, history in the Bible lines up. And then notice it said that that a 90-year-old man was stripped to establish whether he was not circumcised. Wasn't that a biblical custom? Genesis chapter 17? Huh? Y'all better wake up and understand there's plenty of historical proof of Christ in this Bible. But if you're not looking in the right places, you're never going to find it. Page 215. It says, during his reign, a great many public abuses were suppressed by the imposition of heavy penalties. And among the novel enactments were sumptuary laws limiting private expenditure, the substitution of a simple cash distribution for public banquets, and a decree restricting the food sold in wine shops, all right, to green vegetables, dry beans, and the like. Whereas before, all kinds of tasty snacks had been displayed. Punishments were inflicted on the Christians. So you see that? Remember those group of people? So they were punished. It didn't say a sect, which means group, professing a new and mischievous superstition. You see that? Now, let's go to Acts chapter 28 right quick. Acts chapter 28. Acts 28. And we're going to start in verse 20. Let's see what Paul, right? It says, all right. It says, for this cause, therefore have I called for you to see you and to speak with you, because that the hope of Israel, I am bound with this chain. So he was getting locked up for his people. And they said unto him, we neither receive letters out of Judea concerning thee, neither any of the brethren that came and showed or spoke any harm of thee. But we desire to hear what you think. But they wanted to hear what he thought. For concerning this sect, which is SECT, which is a group, it says, we know that everywhere it is spoken against. So you see that everywhere they went, the teachers that they were bringing out said it was spoken against. Let's go back to chapter 24. Let's get some understanding. It says, but this is what Paul's saying, but this I confess unto thee. All right. After the way which they call heresy, which is a group or a sect, so worship I the God of my fathers. He said he believed in the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It says, believing all things which were written in the law and in the prophets. So he was teaching stuff out of the law and in the prophets, and this is what they considered to be anti-Roman. It went against their law. They ain't like that at all. It's tons of proof of our Messiah. Now we go into the book Imperial Rome. All right. This is on page 64. It says, the men who ruled the empire. It says the role of emperors spans more than 500 years of Roman history. All of those listed below bore the title. A dozen of the most famous are portrayed in the borders of the chart. All right. So the most famous ones are the ones that are around the names. All right. And it gives these Roman emperors. All right. It says the length of the emperor's reign varied, all right, enormously. The golden age of Augustus lasted 41 years. Now remember, Caesar Augustus, who we had just read about in Luke chapter 2. All right. But as we see down here that Caesar Augustus ruled, right, he was emperor. As you can see him over in the top left-hand corner. All right. And he ruled from 27 BC all the way to 14 AD. Then you got Tiberius Caesar, who we had read about earlier, who ruled from AD 14 to AD 37, as I told you earlier. Then you see Claudius Caesar, who ruled, because we're going to read about him too a little more, who ruled from 41 to 54 AD. Then you have Nero, who we had read about earlier. Remember him? He ruled from 54 to 68 AD. All right, now remember the book that we had read earlier, the Annals of Imperial Rome, had documented records from AD 14, right, all the way to 66 AD. Because remember, it talked about from the reign of Tiberius all the ending beginning in 14 AD to the end of Nero, which is 66 AD. So now we see the time period in which that book was written, that Cornelius Tacitus had wrote. All right. So keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get us some understanding. All right. And these are some names to keep in mind: Vespasian, Titus, and Trajan. Don't forget those names, because we're going to be learning about a little bit more about each one of them later. All right. So those are some names to keep in your mind. Write them down if you have to. Also, you can write down Pliny the Younger. I definitely know many of you all who study Roman history know exactly who this man is. You have Pliny the Elder and you have Pliny the Younger. All right. So if you have something to write with, you can write that down. I'll kind of give you a little few seconds to write that down. Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger. All right. And the reason being is because we're going to learn a little bit more about these people shortly. All right. Now remember, Pliny the Elder, it tell you, when you do the history or whatnot, Pliny the Elder was the uncle of Pliny the Younger. All right. But anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get some understanding. All right. This is page 65. It says, the younger Pliny, for example, discovering that children in his native town of Como had to go to school in Milan because Como had no teacher for them, put up a third of the expense of hiring an instructor, stipulating that his fellow townsmen must raise the rest. During his lifetime, Pliny also gave 30,000 sesterces a year for rentals on his lands for the support of Como's lower class children. In addition, he built the city a municipal library and provided for his upkeep. On his death, he left the town a great sum of money for the support of 100 freed men who had been his slaves. All right, adding that after their death, the income should be used to provide an annual banquet for the people throughout the empire. Cities were growing rich, and foundations were being established to do for other communities what Pliny had done for Como. All right, now, so clearly, this man done all that, and clearly somebody was definitely going to write about him and talk about him, right? So he also wrote things himself that we're going to get into as well. Okay, now a little bit about Pliny the Younger, for those of you all who have been wondering. If you look on page 182 and 183, it talks about him. I'm going to read it really quick. All right. It says Pliny the Elder. All right. It says a prodigious writer, cavalry officer, and government official. In addition to an active public life, Pliny wrote volumes on natural history, war, weapons, contemporary history, and rhetoric. All right. He died of suffocation while making first-hand observations of the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius. All right, now let's read about his nephew, Pliny the Younger. All right, it says, a lawyer, writer, and orator, the nephew of the elder Pliny. He served the emperor Trajan. So you see that? So this guy who we just reading about, it said he served the emperor who you know today as Trajan. Now remember, if you were paying attention, that was one of the emperors who I told you to remember his name. Okay? But anyway, it says, he served the emperor Trajan as consul and provincial governor. His letters to prominent Romans, including Trajan, filled 10 volumes. 10 volumes. Pliny published most of them himself. Okay, so You keep this in mind because we're going to get some understanding about Pliny the Younger later on. So don't forget about him. All right. Now, of course, we already know that Julius Caesar, of course, he already existed. And this man who ruled about 41 years, um, it says the 41-year reign of Gaius Julius Caesar, Octavianus, first and greatest of Rome, many emperors, was long remembered as a golden age. The Romans called him Augustus, meaning the revered. The Proventicals hailed him as a god. Augustus was above all consuming politicians. So we see right there he was looked at as a god. All right. So it says Julius Caesar, adopted son, Augustus, all right, fought his way to power by eliminating the leaders of the old republic, most notably Mark Antony. He won over the soldiers with gifts, said Tacitus, the populace with cheap grain, and all men with the sweets of response. Now remember, Tacitus was writing about a lot of things that were in the Roman Empire. We see his name again, right? Keep this in mind. All right. So, in this same book, on page 167, you see this black man here with an afro. All right. And this image, they actually tried to whitewash it. If you look if you look on his skin, then you look on the outside of his arm, notice it's dark because they tried to whitewash these images. All right. This is also known, you can find this image in what's known as the Priscilla catacomb, which we might talk about later if I have time. All right, but on this same picture at the bottom, it says a Romanized Christ is shown as the Good Shepherd in this painting in a Christian catacomb in Rome. All right, it says the short-haired, beardless Jesus is represented as a simple herder. Now, keep in mind, if this man was supposed to be made up, why are they talking about him in the annals of Rome? Annals, the records of imperial Rome. Why are they talking about him if he was just some man that just existed, wearing a Roman tunic? Then it say, first century Romans regarded Christ as a minor political rebel who wrote Tacitus was crucified under Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate. Remember we read that earlier. Although he preached for less than 3 years in remote Palestine, which you know is Israel, his disciples were many. All right. And remember we read earlier they were called Christians. It says, and they were soon traveling Roman roads to distant cities and provinces. In time, the whole Roman Empire became a seabed of a new religion. All right. Now, so here it is in history. They're writing about this man. So obviously he existed. All right. Now, let's go to page 169 and 170. All right. It says, in the early years, Christians were blamed and punished. Sound like what we read earlier. By the Romans for all sorts of disasters. Remember we read earlier, Nero tried to blame, said that they burnt down the city. It says plagues, inflation, even barbarian, right? Incursions. The first Christians were put to death after they were held responsible by Nero for the fire that burned much of Rome in 64 AD. Now, this sounds exactly like what we had just read by Tacitus, who told us this. Remember that? Then it say their executions became sports events, wrote Tacitus. So he wrote about that. It says they were covered with wild animal skin and torn apart by dogs. Sound like what we read earlier. Huh? It says the emperor Decius forced Christians to take loyalty oaths. Valerian organized mass murders of churchmen, forbidding access to regular burial places. Christians buried their dead in the graves used by the poor, crowded underground vaults called catacombs. See that? Built outside the city. So, our people back then were being persecuted. and they were burying the dead, right, underground. Underground, which of course you'll see a picture of. So but where's the bodies at? See, the thing is, if you don't do your research, you ain't gonna know where to look and get your understanding on it. All right. But then in this picture right here, you see these black people, right? Who's that? It says, Christ and the apostles are seen in a fresco from a Roman catacomb. As in most Christian painting until the Middle Ages, Christ is portrayed clean shaven, for the Romans regarded beards as a mark of barbarians. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? Again, this is for people who be thinking that there's no history. There's plenty of history on this. And these images can be shown and found in catacombs. There's a book I have here. I've had this book for about 3 years now. Maybe 3-4 years now. It says The Unknown Catacomb, a unique discovery of early Christian art. Now, when you see the word Christian, you'd automatically assume, again, that it's talking about their religion. But remember earlier, we read earlier that there was a time where the disciples were called Christians. All right, and this is before the Christian religion. Okay? Now, look at this right here. What is this we looking at? This tomb here. Or this place is looking like it's going underground. What is this? Huh? What is this we looking at? This is a catacomb. Alright? This is what it says on the first page. For anyone entering a Christian catacomb for the first time, the impression is of making one's way down into a dark, mysterious kingdom, into another world, made up of tall, narrow galleries. What's galleries? Pictures. Corners and sudden bends. Openings with other tunnels branching off. Stairways and shafts. So what you know is an underground city. It says the sensation of unease and disquiet is a natural one, reminiscent of the nagging apprehensions of losing oneself in a labyrinth. All right. So let's continue. It says, even at that time when the catacombs or underground cities would have been regularly frequently by the people visiting the tombs of martyrs, those that died, right? Or those of members of their own families. Such feelings appear not to have been uncommon. As St. Jerome wrote, when I was a boy at Rome and was being educated in liberal studies, I was accustomed with others of like age and mind to visit on Sundays the sepulchres, that's the tombs or the graves, of the apostles and martyrs. And often did I enter the crypts deep dug in the earth. See that? With the walls on either side lined with the bodies of the dead, where everything is so dark that it almost seems as if the psalmist's words were fulfilled. See that? Then it gets Psalms 55:15. This is what he wrote. Here and there the light, not entering through the windows, but filtering down from above through shaft, relieves the honor of the darkness. But again, as one cautiously moves forward, the black night comes round, and there comes to mind the lines of Virgil, surrounding horrors all my soul of fright, and more, the dreadful silence to the night. Now, check this out. It says, of over 50 known catacombs in Rome, most are denied to our curiosity in order to protect their wall paintings. So there's certain catacombs you can't even get into, which even human breath could damage imperceptibly. The 5 open to the public: Agnes, Callistus, Domitilla, Priscilla, and Ad Catacombus. Saint Sebastian are visited by more than 1 million people each year. And I ain't know nothing about none of this until I read it in this book and I began to do studies. Then I started learning how people got the ideas like underground bunkers and things like that. Learn how my ancestors had schools and things down there. And when we got kicked out of Rome, a lot of us was living underground. I didn't learn nothing about this. We were fleeing. But anyway, it says, after long exploration underground, the visitor reemerges into the light of day with a sense of relief, almost as if a secret tension had been relaxed, because visiting catacombs is not an objective experience. Still, implicit in such a visit are the risks that were run from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD by the sect or the group called the Christians. You see that? Against whom the Roman Senate had issued servant edicts, and for whom more than one emperor had demonstrated his aversion. He was thrown into the lions. Catacombs in Greek literally means at the hollows. See that? That's what that means. So they were throwing us to the lions, and our people was running underground. As you can see, look at this one. Okay. And note this same book, page 24. Notice at the bottom it says the Last Supper. Now, the Last Supper in the Bible, what you know is Passover. When Christ sat down with the 12. Do you know that they got a portrait of that? Huh? Well, before I do, look above. It says in the 4th century, Pope Damasus gave Christians a new devotional impulse to seek out the tombs and relics of the martyrs, those that died, in the various catacombs. Thereafter, the catacombs themselves were gradually deserted by the faithful, with the 8th and 9th century seeing the relics transferred to city churches, which thus became dedicated to the various saints and martyrs. But look at this right here. You see the original painting of the 12 disciples. Look at these black men. And they tried to whitewash these images and they couldn't destroy it. So, of course, they had to leave it alone. But look how dark they are. Look at that. Let's continue. Now, you can see Daniel on this wall here. They drew that in this catacomb. Ain't that something? Daniel and the lions then they drew. And then on the other side, isn't that what we saw in the other book, the Annals of Imperial Rome? Huh? Didn't we just see that in that book? Call him the Good Shepherd? In the Priscilla Catacomb? Huh. A scene inspired by a similar hope for salvation and resurrection. These catacombs are underground. You'd be walking down the street, don't even know it. You walking or driving over a catacomb. Look at this. Look at these homes and things like this above the catacombs. Look at the caption. Above the catacomb. The Via Latina is on the left and the Via Dino Campane on the right. Campani on the right. And underground, and under that is the catacombs. The places underground. Isn't that something? Some of these catacombs they found is miles and miles long. Right in your faces. Right in your faces. Now let us turn to the book Claudius the God. Now we know Claudius Caesar was the 5th ruler or emperor in the Roman Empire. And he was actually close friends with a man by the name of Herod Agrippa. Now those of you who know of the family of Herod, we know these were the people that you read about in the Bible. During the time of the Roman Empire, remember when Christ was born, he was born during the time that Rome was actually in power. Now Claudius Caesar was great friends with Herod, and he used to always ask Herod questions, all right? Because keep in mind, though that family grew up knowing the customs of the Jews. Keep in mind, who was king of the Jews during the time of Christ? Herod, right? Now, so, I'm trying to make it quickly as possible because I actually want to read this whole book to you, but because there's a lot of good things in here, but I'm, try to keep it as simple as possible. All right, so again, this book, Claudius the God, and what we're about to do is we're about to get us some understanding. Now, when you go into the history, again, you learn that Herod Agrippa, Claudius' friend, who he knew the customs of the Israelites, all right, and the Bible records this as fact as well. So let us reflect on the scriptures when Paul was about to be killed by his own people, Israelites. They were accusing him of trying to put him to death. So Paul reached out to Herod Agrippa, and let's see what he said. Let's go to Acts chapter 26 and verse 1 right quick. All right. It says, Then Agrippa said to Paul, Thou art permitted or allowed to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched forth his hand and answered for himself. Verse 2, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching, meaning concerning, all things thereof, for I am accused of the Jews. So remember, he was accused of his own people. It says, especially because I know thee to be an expert in all customs and questions which are among the Jews. Wherefore I beseech, I beg you to hear me patiently. Wow. So, it would make sense for Claudius Caesar, of course, to have this King Herod Agrippa as his friend and ask some questions concerning the Jews. Because that's what we're going to read about in this book in a second. When he wanted to know something about them. Why? Because remember, we just read he was an expert in our customs. He grew up knowing the truth. All right, it was passed down from generation to generation. All right, so Paul, who was an Israelite, called this white Edomite an expert in all customs and questions, which are among the Jews. Keep this in mind because Agrippa was friends with the very man Claudius in which we're about to read, the very man who did not like us. All right, who were called Christians by the population, the people in which we read about earlier. Also keep in mind that this man was an Edomite, so-called white man, and he knew our customs. All right. So now, with that being said, let's go ahead and continue real quick. All right. All right. Now we're gonna get page 283. All right. It says, Herod seems to have been persuaded by Philo that he is really the Messiah, and that he is destined not only to redeem the Jews from the yoke of the foreigner, but to combine the children of Shem. Now remember, Shem is one of the sons of Noah. But to combine the children of Shem together in a great spiritual empire under the rule of the Lord of hosts. This is the only possible explanation for his extreme nervous for the future. Yeah, right. There seems to be altogether too much religion in the air. It's a bad sign. Now stop. Notice that this Herod let Philo convince him that he was the Messiah and not the real Christ. This further lets you know that the Bible was around this time. This also kills the lies that people say that the Bible was created in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. But we reading this in Roman records, though, right? That they had the Bible before then, and that Herod thought himself as the Messiah. This white man was tripping anyway. Claudius said that this was a bad sign. He said too much religion, and that's a bad sign of people who wanted to worship, or what you again call as religion, right? Now, there's also let you know that the Bible had to have existed. They didn't deny the fact that the Bible was real and people like Christ walked the earth. They just chose to worship their other gods, their Roman gods. Most of them did. It says, let's continue. It says, it reminds me, listen up. It says, remind you of what you said when we had that mystical idiot, John the Baptist, beheaded. So that means what? John the Baptist had to exist. You see what they wrote in his letter? It reminds me of what you said when we had that mystical idiot, John the Baptist, beheaded. Religious fanatism. is the most dangerous form of insanity? I have said too much, I think. But I can trust you, my dear mother. Right? This is what he wrote to his mother, Bernice. Not to let the story go any further. Burn this when you have read it. Now notice he writes about John the Baptist. Lets you know that John the Baptist did exist. If John the Baptist existed, clearly Christ did as well. In this letter, he also confirms that John the Baptist put to death, as he said on page 283 as we read it. It reminds me of what you said when you had that mystical idiot John the Baptist beheaded. Huh? Now we read that in the Roman historical records, right? But let's go into the Bible. It confirms it. Matthew chapter 14, verse 1. It says, at that time Herod, the tetrarch, heard of the fame of Jesus. And he said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. And therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herod's sake, his brother Philip's wife. But John said to him, it is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Right? It says, verse 7, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with them at the meat, he commanded to be given to her. Look at this wicked woman. She wanted John the Baptist's head. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. So there you have it. John was in fact beheaded, just as it recorded in Romans records and as it is recorded in the history of the Romans. Verse 11. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, meaning young woman, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. See that? So our history is recorded. Don't let nobody got you thinking that there ain't no history on these people. It's tons of history. Why would the enemies of Christ be writing about this? Why would Claudius Caesar, the fifth emperor in the Roman Empire, just sit and make that up? For what? There was definitely more than one Herod now, as we know. But remember we read about Herod Agrippa in the book of Acts 26 chapter, whom Paul called an expert in the customs of our forefathers? This Herod grew up and doing and learning about our customs, but was not a follower of who we call Christ. However, he himself knew about Christ. This is a copy of the letter that he wrote to Claudius Caesar. This is what that Herod Agrippa wrote to Claudius because he was curious about the Messiah. Alright, page 329. Alright, check this out. And this is for those who got the book. Follow along. It says, you ask whether anyone identifies himself with the Messiah. I have met nobody lately who does so. The last one that I remember was a man called Joshua ben Joseph. Now Joshua, the Hebrew word for Joshua was Yeshua. Ben is the Hebrew word means son, and Joseph, a native of Galilee. Now remember, the letter J did not exist back then, so this Joshua would be more correctly as what? Yehoshua, Yeshua, Yahawashi. But it also said his name was Joshua. Ben, now hold on. Again, don't Ben mean son? So in the records, it said his name is Joshua ben Joseph. This means what? Yeshua, the son of Yosef. That's a Hebrew. That's a Hebrew. So understand, we know that Joseph was Christ's father. Not his biological father, but that was his father. So understand that here it is, they identified him as Joshua ben Joseph. Now, again, it says, you ask whether anyone identifies himself with the Messiah. I've met nobody lately who does so. The last one that I remember was a man called Joshua or Yahshua ben Yosef, native of Galilee, when I was a magistrate, meaning governor, of Tiberias under my uncle Antipas. He, talking about Jesus, had a considerable following among the uneducated and used to preach to large crowds at the lakeside. Now hold up, now correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this Yahawashi Jesus do this, preach to large crowds at the lake? According to the Bible, it confirms that. Let's go to Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5 verse 1. And it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him, talking about Yahawashi, to hear the word of God, he stood by the lake. You see that? By the lake. Gennesaret. Now that's a lake in Israel. It says, and saw two ships standing by the lake. But the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their tents. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. So yes, it's definitely the same person that Herod was speaking about. And it's in their records. But anyway, back on page 329. It says he was a man of striking appearance. And through his father was only an artisan, claimed a descendant from David. Don't that line up with the Bible? Revelation 2:22 and 16. He's the root and offspring of David. Lines right on up with the Bible. Let's flip over page 329. Let's see what else Claudius said. Herod said to Claudius. It says, this Joshua or Yahshua had been an infant prodigy. A common phenomenon among the Jews. And it says, and knew the scriptures better than most doctors of divinity. Now let us turn to our records. Before we do, if anyone has the lost books of the Bible, as I do, you all read the book of infancy. Alright? You learn a lot about Christ's childhood. I mean, wow, it's deep. It's deep. You get a better understanding of this. It's the book of infancy. Like an infant. Infancy. Alright? But anyway, it said, remember he said this Joshua or Jesus had been an infant prodigy, right, among the Jews. He knew the scriptures better than most doctors, right? Now let us get that record out. This is what Joseph and Mary. This is when Joseph and Mary was looking for Jesus, right? When he was in the temple. Luke chapter 2, verse 46 to 52. It says, and it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, meaning church, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. Remember now, Christ is a child, right? This time now, verse 40 in this same chapter says that the child grew and waxed strong in the spirit, filled with wisdom, and grace of God was upon him. So let us back up to verse 47. All right. Remember, he in the temple and the doctors are present, right? And they're getting it in. Verse 47. And all that heard him were astonished, meaning shocked at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said to him, son, why hast thou dealt with us? Behold, your father and I sought for thee sorrowing. Let's jump down to verse 52. And Yahawashi Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. So, we see that was in the public Roman records about how he knew the scriptures better than most doctors. And remember, he was a youngin' getting it in. So think about it. You can't talk bad about somebody who don't exist. Think about it. You had an enemy and people found out, again, that you never existed. How that's going to make you look? So in the Roman records, they got the understanding of this Jesus. All right, page 330, it says, at any rate, Joshua used James' philosophical gleanings from Gardera and his own knowledge of the Jewish scriptures to compose a synthetic religion of his own. But a religion without authority is nothing. So secretly at first, and then publicly, he identified himself with the Messiah and spoke as Moses had once spoken. So you see that? They even knew and understand that these people like Moses existed. All right, but then you get the silly Negro today be like, oh no, they ain't real, they made up. But then he say, as if it were the mouth of God. He had a most ingenious mind and used to deliver his messages in the form of simple fables with moral endings. Like what? Like the Bible says he spoke with parables. That's what he's talking about right here. Didn't he speak in parables? Huh? Matthew chapter 13. Then he say he made himself very troublesome with the Jewish religious authorities. Who are he talking about? The Pharisees. Said whom he accused of combining a strict observance of the Torah, a law, with rapaciousness and insolence toward the poor. Says there are many good stories told of him. All right. One of his political opponents tried to catch him out once by asking whether it was right for a consensuous Jew to pay the imperial tax. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at Matthew chapter 22, verse 15 through 22, you will read this story right here. Here it is, Claudius Caesar is confirming what we read in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15 through 22. So, it goes on to say, if he had answered yes, he would have lost his hold on the nationalists. If he'd answered no, he would have made himself liable for arrest by the civil authorities. So now we see it was a setup question he was asking. So anyway, it goes on. This is what Agrippa goes on to say. So he pretended to be quite innocent about the matter, and he asked to be shown the amount of money due before he would make any answer. They showed him a silver piece and said, "Look, every householder has to pay this much." He asked, "Whose head is on the coin?" I can't read Latin. They said, "It's the head of Tiberius Caesar, of course." He said, "Why, if it's Caesar's coin, pay it to Caesar. But don't fail to pay God what is due to God." Now keep in mind, remember they just telling the story on what they heard, right? Now remember the Bible confirms this. Then it goes on to say they also tried to catch him out on points of Jewish law or Israelite law, but he always had chapter and verse ready to justify his teachings. That sounds just like some of the brothers and us. We'll be out on the streets, people ask us a question, but we got chapter and verse to justify what we believe and what we teaching. Says eventually, however, he comprised himself as a religious heretic, and the end of the story, that was our old friend Pontius Pilate, then governor of Judea and Samaria, arrested him for creating popular disorders and handed him over for trial by the supreme Jewish religion's court of Jerusalem, where he was condemned to death for blasphemy. Now, don't that sound like what you read in the Bible? From John chapter 10 all the way to John chapter 19. Huh? It says, when I come to think of it, he did die the same year as goddess Livia, and his followers did desert him. So that much of prophecy you quoted was fulfilled in him. Huh? So you see that? Letting you know what, man, because like when you read before this, they was asking about who's the Messiah. Now the people who don't even follow him, like, well, dang, well, according to that scripture, that would more than likely fit him. But then you get some Negro who non-messianic today can't see the prophecies in the scriptures today and lost your damn mind. But anyway, it says there are now people who say that he's a god and that they saw his soul ascend to heaven after his death. just like Augustus and Drusillus, and claimed that he was born at Bethlehem and that he fulfilled all the other messianic prophecies in one way or other. But I propose to stop this nonsense once and for all. So you see right then and there, he ain't having that, right? So think about it. Why would this man sit and make this up? Say all this, but then he say, but I propose to stop this nonsense once and for all. Since only 3 days ago, I arrested and executed James, who seems to be the chief intellect of the movement. I hope to recapture and execute another leading fanatic called Simon, arrested at the same time, who somehow escaped from prison. Now, wow, don't we read that in the Bible? Don't that sound like what you read in the Bible? In the book of Acts chapter 12. You learn in, matter of fact, let's get that. Acts chapter 12 real quick. Acts chapter 12 real quick. Acts chapter 12 and verse 1, which reads, Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to take Peter also. Alright? Because remember, Simon's name was Peter. It says, there were the days of unleavened bread. Now keep this in mind. What you just read confirms in Acts chapter 12. Huh? When you read 1 through 19, you learn about this. The same chapter you learn how he escaped from prison because the angel let him out. Same thing you read. Read this chapter on your own. See for yourself. See if I'm lying. Read Acts chapter 12, verse 1 through 21. Alright? It's time for y'all to wake up and understand that this Bible is historical. And you can't hide from it. You can run, but you can't hide. This whole book, they in here talking about Roman history and things that went over during the Roman Empire and all sorts of events, and including Christ. And these were people who did not follow Christ at all. At all. Let's continue. Let's get it, because there's so many. Let's go to page 14. It says, the chief emotional appeal of Christianity was that this Joshua or Jesus was said to have risen from the dead, and no man have ever done before, except in legends. After being crucified, he visited his friends apparently. That's what he's saying. He visited his friends apparently, none the worse for his experience, had eaten and drunk to prove that he was no vision. He was no vision, and they're gone up to heaven in a blaze of glory. And there was no proof that these were all lies, because as it happened, there had been an earthquake just after the crucifixion, when he had dislodged a heavy stone from the mouth of the tomb where the corpse had been put, talking about Christ. Just like the Bible talks about. Matthew 28 says the guard had fled in panic. This is Matthew 28, 1 through 6. And when they had came back, the corpse was gone. Evidently, it had been stolen. So now you see right then and there, this guy don't even believe that. He said evidently it had been stolen. Alright? This is what Agrippa is saying to Claudius. Then it says, once a story like this begins to circulate in the East, it is difficult to stop it. So now you see right in there, they're trying to figure out what's going on so they can stop this madness, is what they saying. Alright? It says, and it would have been undignified to argue against its absurdity, meaning its foolish, this stupidity, in other words, in a public edict. But I did publish a strong order in Galilee, talking about Israel, where the Christians were most numerous, making it a capital offense to violate graves. So here it is. He made it against the law if you violated graves, because keep in mind, he ain't want none of this stuff to be getting back out again. None of this for no, I guess he could say foolish stuff to even circulate back, because he said it's hard to stop it. He said, but I must waste no more time over these ridiculous Christians. I must continue with my own story, right? I must tell about the 3 letters which I added to the Roman alphabet. See that? So, and then about the great secular games I celebrated, right? About the sisters I took of Roman citizens. All right, so here it is. He said, look, I ain't finna waste no time on that. I got other stuff I can be talking about. All right, so it's time to wake up and understand that there is plenty of historical proof. Why would the enemies of Christ be talking about them, then talking bad about them, and then turn around and say they don't exist? They knew he existed. They knew about these miracles and about the scriptures, even though they worship other gods. But then you get some silly Negro today thinking it's all made up. How you explain this? All right, now remember we were just talking about how the Christians was thrown to the lions, right? Now, what most people don't understand is most of those people you see in those movies as gladiators and things like that, a lot of those people were fighting for their freedom. And many people think that those were mostly white people. No, those were the Israelites that were fighting animals. All right, so again, our history is like a puzzle. It has to be put together in its proper pieces. And if you don't know and who you understand your history and who you are, then you might not understand. All right, now, so in this picture right here I have, this is in the book Imperial Rome, page 45. You see a gladiator right here, right, fighting a lion, right? It says a deadly contest recorded on a bas relief. A lion and a lioness lunge at a gladiator. One gladiator has fallen. A third spears the lion from behind. All right. Now, it says Roman holidays without end. Ain't that something? Holidays, huh? It says during festivals, huge crowds would converge on the Romans' great amphitheater, right? Like a stadium. All right. It says, and many circuses to attach a day of games, and the vast coliseums, up to 50,000 people could watch gladiators fight wild beasts or other gladiators, right? So they'd be fighting each other or they'd be fighting animals. It says, and even in even larger circus maximus, some 260,000 gathered to cheer daredevil charioteers as they race around perilously tight track. So when you see those in those movies where they be racing each other and all that, understand that these were mainly your ancestors that was doing this. So when you learn about that history, those were your people. They did this for their freedom and all sorts of things. All right. So it even tell you, it says occasions more than half of the days of the year became holidays. That's something you learn. Now again, this is history that you see in movies. History you may learn a little bit about it in schools, but they won't really tell you. On the next page, page 46, the hunt for victims. All right. If you look in this picture here, you'll see lions and people going after these animals, right? Trying to trap them and catch them. It says, I'm going to read a little bit of this. It says, great number of wild beasts fought and died in Roman arenas. The slaughter was often immense. 5,000 animals were slain in a single day to supply the arenas. Hunters spread through the provinces, rounding up lions, tigers, panthers, bull, hippopotamus, rhinoceros, and elephants. So they did all this just so they can get a show. We were the entertainment back then. You black people that was in Rome, you were being used for entertainment. Just like today. Nothing new. Still being used for entertainment. Alright? It says, as shown in the mosaic above from North Africa, the hunts were spectacles in their own sight. In the mosaic, Roman colonels direct the pursuit on a horseback while beaters chase the animals on foot. Alright? So, We were their entertainment back then. I wanted you all to look at this so you can kind of get the idea of these people who you know as Christians. You're going to learn this is what was happening to us. All right? Now, I want to show you a picture of this little Coliseum real quick so you can kind of get an idea on what it looks like. Take a look at this Coliseum here. All right? It says, amphitheater at Arles and Gaul seated 26,000. Arenas were built everywhere in the empire, for governors found the splendor and violence of games an effective way to impress their provincials. So they did this to impress people of other areas, just like you see in movies. See that? And they had us fighting these damn animals to the death. Look at this section right here, Torment of Beasts. It says, and in amphitheaters like that, like the one above, like the one we just saw, Romans could see according to Pliny the Younger. Remember, I said remember his name because we're gonna talk about the letters that he wrote. Right? It says that the love of glory and the desire to win inhabited the bodies of even slaves and criminals. Huh? It says the crowds delighted to see odd spectacles. Domesticated panthers pulling chariots in harness, or elephants kneeling before the emperor's box to write Latin in the sand with their trunks. That's kind of dope, though. It says bears wrestling buffalo, or bulls battling rhinoceros. These people were crazy. It says the impresarios who staged these spectacles were always thinking up of unequal matches. An army of archers might meet a pack of panthers, or a gladiator might be forced to fight for his life. You see that? Against a lion. So, and they even show this. Look at this picture here of this man here, but notice his hair. That's not a white boy's hair. That's a little afro. That's not no little stringly hair. That's a black man. And you notice they cut his nose off. I wonder why they did that. Everything else intact, but you cut the nose off, huh? Isn't that something? Let's go to the next page. All right. And you can see these gladiators, right? And these entertainers, musicians, right? You see all these pictures right here? Let's read what's going on, though. Bizarre games for the gladiators. It says, Hail, Emperor. Those who are about to die salute you. With this solemn address, the gladiators scheduled to fight filed past the imperial box. Most of them were prisoners of war, slaves, or criminals sent to stern training schools. The night before, they had been fitted with a lavish banquet, where fans came to eye favorites and gamblers to estimate odds. Now, that sounds just like today. The night before a fight, people come in, right? They do the weigh-in and all that. People betting on who gonna win and all that. Huh? It says, now in the stands, peddlers hawk cold drinks, buns and sausages. Don't that sound like today? In the theaters today? In the stadiums today? They do the same thing. Selling drinks and stuff like that and food. Then it says the more unusual the contest, the better the Romans liked it. Look at these wicked people. Gladiators often fought with mismatched weapons. Negroes, a rare sight in Rome, were matched with each other. So now we see these were black people. Black people. Just like you saw that lion that was over that man's head, devouring him when they cut his nose off. That was a black man. And these were y'all ancestors. A lot of them, like you said, they were criminals, right? Slaves. Because remember, we were their slaves. That's a fact. And a lot of these people were Christians. But we'll learn a little more later. It says a dwarf might be pitted against a woman. That's messed up. A superb fighter might become a popular idol, kind of like your Mike Tyson's and right, Muhammad Ali's. It says, and might even win his freedom, because remember, he was a slave, right? But if a gladiator who had made a poor showing fell, the crowd shouted, "Cut his throat!" And the emperor turned thumbs down, sealing the loser's fate. Don't you see that in movies? See, they show you this right in your face. Right in your face. These black people, they use this as entertainment. Sports, as we read earlier. Killing us was like a sport to them. The stuff we went through. And they try to bury this history. But it's in their records. The average person won't think to buy no book like this. The average person think that the gladiators were white people. When they wasn't. So when you look at most of these sports and these stadiums and coliseums and all that, no one understand that they had your people as entertainment. Nothing new. They still use it as entertainment today. Nothing new. We were the gladiators. Aren't we still the best fighters? The best at sports? Huh? Of course we are. Of course. See, remember our history is like a puzzle. You know, we got to put it all together in its proper pieces, because if you don't, it's really easy to get lost. That's why many people are led astray when it comes to our history, because they do not know how to put our history back in its proper pieces. Unlike all the other nations, their history is there, but ours is there too, but our history has been scattered because we've been a scattered people. All right. Now, if you watch my videos all the time, you know it's a book I always use, Babylon Timbuktu. I want to go on page 118 and 119, because understand that I was telling you that those gladiators were black people, those people that were called criminals and slaves and Christians. They were, of course, people of color, regardless of what movies and pictures show you. All right, now check this out. This is what the black historian Rudolph R. Windsor wrote. It says, about halfway down the eastern border of Algeria, there are large settlements of black Jews at a place called Wargla, says Salouche. Jews were at Wargla as early as 620 AD, according to Algeria. 350 miles the Mediterranean is a colony of Jews as black as Negroes. It says in the Garian section of Libya, not too far from Wargla, there existed a troglodyte Jews. It is reported that the Jews fled to the strongholds of the Nefelshah mountain range because of what? Roman, and Arab persecution. Because remember, we were fleeing from the Romans, right? They were making us being gladiators. We were like, hell with that. We up out of here. So it says, Godby quotes H.S. Cowper, who says that the Jews of the city Tripoli assert that they were migrated from Garian. These Jews, okay, these Jews constructed subterranean synagogues and underground houses. Now remember, we learned earlier about the catacombs. See that? We were known for doing this. It says Seleucus visited the strongholds of these troglodyte Jews in the early part of this century. The Jews had built compartments 3 and 4 stories underground. That goes back into the book that we read earlier, containing a population of 30,000. See that? It says Gabi says that Hasi Wardig visit their cities of Benin, Abbas, Jebel, Nefessa, Yehud Abbas, Tagina, Jebel, Ephraim. It says they had shops, stores, schools, and synagogues all underground. All underground, right? And remember, we know we earlier had graveyards and everything, all underground. It says the achievement of these Jews prove what a persecuted society can do under adverse conditions. These Jews had a foundation to build on, Unlike other persecuted people, they had their own history, culture, laws, language, and skills. Now, of course, it's going to be a. Now, this is let you know this is one reason why they want to put us in slavery. Why they want to come get us and put us through the transatlantic slave trade. Look at the stuff we could do. It says between Wargala and the Gorean, there is a Jewish town called Tidrina. Here, the Jews have also constructed subterranean compartments. Nahum Salu says that he was guided to an ancient synagogue, which was located underground. At this time, he made an extensive observation of the village, which contained 20 underground courts. 20 underground courts, and its 700 inhabitants. Also, he found there a young man teaching Hebrew. See that? When Seleucus was in the city about 1 hour, the men had just returned from the market. Because remember, there were stores underground. Seleucus says they are all of a fine, dark type. The rabbi or master or the teacher was descended from Jews or Israelites who had migrated from Morocco. And if you saw the videos that I make, you already know my take on that. If you saw King James on trial, you already know the understanding of this already. There were Israelites that was also in Morocco as well, who were also called Moor. Moor which just means black or dark, Negro. But that's another topic. I don't want to go too far offhand. But understand, when you look at these catacombs, when we were drawing pictures and things like that of Christ and Daniel and all that, these were things they did for memories. And when you do the research, you learn that when they found these tombs, they saw pagan stuff down there that they tore up. So understand that we got a rich history. You just got to be able to piece it back in its right puzzle, right pieces in its proper perspective. Earlier, I told you to remember Pliny the Younger, right? Not to be confused with Pliny the Elder. All right, we're talking about the nephew, which is Pliny the Younger. All right. When his father died, he was raised under Pliny the Elder. But anyway, a little bit about it. If you go into the introduction in this book, Pliny the Younger, Complete Letters, all right, it was translated by a man named P.G. Walsh. Now, in the introduction, page XXIII, which is 23, it says, his conscientious investigation of the growth and practice of the new religion many worship reveals that it had already existed in the province as early as AD 90. Now remember, Christianity didn't start until 325 AD. So now we know that this is talking about the actual followers of Christ, the people. He states that there are numerous Christians of all ages, every rank, and both sexes. So they assembled at dawn on a fixed day of the week. What day you think it's talking about? The Sabbath day. Then it say to sing a hymn antiphonally to Christ as God, and to bind themselves by an oath to avoid acts of theft, right? Brigandage and adultery, not to break their word, and not to withhold money deposited with them when asked for it. Then it says, following the ceremony, they departed, but again assembled to take food. This was probably agape the love feast. Now, when you learn and go into the history, you learn that during the time, like even the book Claudius the God on page 333, they talked about the love feast. Celsus on the True Doctrine talked about the love feast. We'll talk about that book in a second, and I think about it. But they was referring to that as what you know as the Passover. All right. But anyway, they called it, the outsiders called it the love feast. Okay. But anyway, it says, first described in Paul's first epistle, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 17, which is true. It says, Pliny finds these Christians guiltless of any crimes. To establish their innocence, he even interrogates under torture 2 maidservants who were called deaconess. All right, because back then you had deaconess in the Bible. All right, like Phoebe, she was a deaconess. I believe that's like Romans chapter 16. She was a deaconess. A deaconess was a maid servant, not no preacher. But anyway, And this confirms it. It says, nonetheless, he ordered the execution of those who refused to renounce their ascension to this sect, meaning this group, because of their willful obstinacy. All right. It says, Katimiki, disobedience to a judicial command. He asked the emperor's advice on how to proceed with the investigation. So now he was persecuting them, and now he's gonna we're gonna read about how he wrote to Emperor Trajan. All right, because he needed advice on how to basically, like I said, proceed with this investigation. But then it goes on to say, Trajan in reply commands his governor's actions, though Christians are not to be sought out. Once indicted, they are to be punished if they refuse to deny their religion and to worship the Roman gods. Thus the emperor makes it clear that the adhesion to Christianity continues a crime even if no criminal activity is involved. Even if no criminal activity is involved. Okay, now again, in this book you even learn that Pliny's close relationship with his uncle, who had become his adopted father, led him to share the elder Pliny's interest in natural philosophy or whatnot. That's on the next page. But anyway, these events mainly took place between 213 to 228 years before what we know as the Council of Nicaea. All right, basically about 10 to 16 years after the Bible was even completed. Okay, so now, in the 10th letter that he wrote, this is on page 278. All right, and we're going to read what he said. Um, it says, it is my regular custom, my Lord, to refer to you all questions which cause me doubt. For whom can better guide my hesitant steps, or to instruct my ignorance? So this is what he written to the emperor, you know what I'm saying, because he needed some advice. But he said, I have never attended hearings concerning Christians, so I am aware what is unusually punished or investigated, and to what extent. Then he says, I am more than a little in doubt whether there is to be a distinction between ages, and to what extent the young should be treated no different from the more hardened, whether pardon should be granted to repentance, whether the person who has been a Christian in some sense not benefit by having renounced it, whether it is the name Christian. So you see that, notice it is the name Christian. All right, so it itself untainted with crimes, or the crimes which cling to the name. What name? Christian. All right. So again, this is going into the history. Remember, this is by Pliny the Younger. This letters that he wrote to Emperor Trajan. But it says, which should be punished. Okay. So now, in the next step, not the next step, but the next paragraph. All right. It says, in the meantime, this is the procedure I have followed. So now he's telling them the steps that he took, because remember, he needs advice, right? It says, in the cases of those brought before me as Christians, I asked them whether they were Christians. If they admitted it, I asked them a second and a third time, threatening them with execution. Now think about it. Why would this guy right here, Pliny the Younger, who we know existed, make this up? Clearly these people existed. It says those who remain obdurate I ordered to be executed. For I was in no doubt whether it was which they were confessing, that their obstinacy and their inflexible stubbornness should at any rate be punished. Others similarly lunatic were Roman citizens, so I registered them as due to be sent back to Rome. Now remember the story in Acts chapter 22, verse 18 to 30? They was finna basically kill Paul, right? But until they found out he was a Roman citizen, huh? Read that, Acts 22, verse 18 to 30. And then Acts 23, verse 17 to 35. Either they was finna lock him up or they was finna kill him. One of the two, but I think they want to put him down. All right. But anyway, read that. That lines up with the Bible. But let's continue. It says, later in the course of the hearings, as usually happens, the charge ripped outwards. And more examples appeared. An anonymous document was published containing the names of many, those who denied that they were or had been Christians, and called upon the gods after me, and with incense and wine made obeisance to your statue, to my Trajan, which I had ordered to be brought in together with the images of the gods for this very purpose, and who moreover curse Christ. Those who are truly Christian cannot, it is said, be forced to do any of these things in order to be acquitted. So he already understood. So basically, he went to test them to see if they was lying or not. Worship these images and curse Christ. You know what I'm saying? If they didn't do it, they got punished. If they did do it, he said he acquitted and let them go. Why? Because he knew it was against their faith. All right. So one of the two, he either knew, all right, well, clearly they ain't strong enough in faith to stand on it. So these people are weak in the faith. Let me go ahead and let them go. Or they worship the gods like they say they do. All right. And so again, we see that these people have to exist, though. It says others who were named by an informer, meaning a snitch, stated that they were Christians and then denied it. They said that, in fact, they had been, but had abandoned their allegiance some 3 years previously, some more years earlier, and one or two as many as 20 years before. So, and this is show you, like, people who come in this truth, they ain't going to hold on to it. They did it back then and the same today. All right, it says, all these as well worship your statue and images of the gods and blaspheme Christ. Christ. So that lets you know what? Christ existed. He locking these people up, torturing them, having them worship other images. Clearly lets you know that Christ existed. Why would this person be making this up? This is court. You got to disprove this. It says, now remember, this is first-hand accounts. He's saying this. It says they maintain, however, that all their guilt and error involved was that they were accustomed to assemble at dawn on a fixed day. There it is again, on the Sabbath day, to sing a hymn, antiphonally to Christ as God, and to bind themselves by an oath, not for the commission of some crime, but to avoid acts of theft, right? You see that it's the same thing we had read earlier. Brigandage, like a bandit, a thief, all right, and adultery, which is sleeping with another man's wife, not to break their word and not to withhold money deposited with them when asked for it. When these rites were completed, it was their custom to depart, and then to assemble again to take food, which was, however, common and harmless. They had ceased, they said, to do the following myetic, all right, by which, in accordance with your instructions, I had outlawed the existence of secret brotherhoods. All right. So he said, I thought it all the more necessary to ascertain the truth, from which two maidservants, who were called deaconess, even by employed torture, I found nothing other than a debased and boundless superstition. See that? So this is how you know, like, this can't be made up. Why would the enemies be making this up? Let's continue. He says, I therefore postponed the injury and hasted to consult you, talking about the emperor. All right? Since this issue seemed to me to merit consolation, especially because of the number indicted, for there are many of all ages, every rank, both sexes, talking about male and female, who are summoned and will be summoned to confront danger. The infection of this superstition has extended not merely through the cities, but also through the villages and country areas, but it seems likely that it can be halted and corrected. So now he wants some advice. Now let's see what the Emperor Trajan wrote to Pliny the Younger. Right? It says, you will follow the appropriate procedure, my Secundus, in examining the cases of those who brought before you as Christians. For no general rule can be laid down which would establish a definite routine. Christians are not to be sought out, if brought before you and found guilty, they must be punished. See that? They must be punished, but in such a way that a person who denies that he's a Christian and demonstrates this by action, that is, by worshiping our gods, may obtain pardon for repentance, even if his previous record is suspect. So in other words, if you got snitched on and somebody said, oh, well, there he go right there, get him. If you begin to deny Christ and worship their gods, they let you go. And that's something. All right. It says documents published anonymously must play no role in any accusation. Documents published anonymously must play no role in any accusation, for they give the worst example and are foreign to our age. So again, this shows you that this stuff can't be made up. Everybody seems to be talking about these people who were called Christians by the population of people, as we read earlier. People who followed Christ were persecuted. So they even killed the fact, well, Romans wrote the New Testament. How? It was anti-Roman. Just like what you call the New Testament condemns their teachers and their practices. Just like they themselves, according to their words, wouldn't getting down with no Christ. As a people, they wasn't. Oh, and before we move on, if you got the book Imperial Rome, if you look on page 128, right, you see the same thing. They was talking about Pliny the Younger, confirming that this stuff happened. On page 128. You can't run from this. They confirmed the letters that he wrote to Trajan and confirmed what Trajan wrote back to him. So this stuff is historical. It's in record. The documentation is there. All right, so the next book I have is Celsus on the True Doctrine, as I had mentioned earlier. Now, this book was written, these records is found to be published about 147 years before the Council of Nicaea. So before the Christian religion became established. But check this out on page 22. It says, like Justin and his near contemporary, Tertullian, Clement contrasts the true mystery with the false rites of the unbelievers, the true Gnosis with the false doctrine of the pagans. Then it goes on to say the Christians had been branded atheists for their refusal to pay homage to recognized gods of the state. So you see that those who were considered to be Christians, followers of Christ, they were branded to be atheists. That's what they classified them as. Keep this in mind. It's letting you know that the Bible definitely was against the teachings of that these people followed in the Roman Empire. It says Clement expropriates the charge and turns it against the critics. Says, I am right in branding as atheists men who are ignorant of the true God, but who is shamefully worship child being torn into pieces by titans. So once you go into here, that mean they in here talking bad about the followers of Christ. All right, let's look on page 27. It says, you see, here we go. It says, you see, for one thing, the poor devils. Now, this is we talking about the followers of Christ. It said the poor devils have convinced themselves that they are all going to be immortal and live forever. Huh? Now, what that sound like? Don't that sound like the Bible? How the Bible teaches that we're going to have eternal life? Huh? Romans 6:23. Don't the Bible teach that? 1 Corinthians 15, verse 49 to 53. Huh? Read Philippians chapter 1, verse 20 through 25. 20 through 29, rather. But anyway, it says, you see, for one thing, the poor devils have convinced themselves that they are all going to be immortal and live forever, which makes most of them take death lightly and voluntarily give themselves up to it. They ready to die. See that? Because clearly they know what the Bible teaches. It says, for another, that first lawgiver. Who you think he talking about? That first lawgiver. He talking about Christ. Of theirs persuaded them that they are all brothers the minute they deny the Greek gods. So when they put down idolatry, saying y'all are brothers. Sound like Matthew 12 and 40. His brothers and sisters are those that do the will of the Father. But anyway, he says, denying the Greek gods, thereby breaking our law, meaning Roman law, because back then you had to worship their gods. He said, thereby breaking our law and take it to worshiping him. Who's him? That first lawgiver, talking about Christ. He says, the crucified fool. That's what sophist means. So letting you know he called him a lawgiver, said they worship him, and then he called him a crucified sophist. That means fool. Now, why would he make this up? Clearly, he ain't getting down with Christ and his teachings. He confirmed that he been crucified. He called him a crucified sophist. That means fool. So he says, the crucified sophist himself and living their lives according to his rules. That's why he said that first lawgiver. He says, they scorn all possessions without distinction and treat them as community property. Doctrines such as these, they accept strictly on faith. So just like the Bible tell you in Acts chapter 2, verse 44 through 47, Acts chapter 4, verse 32 tell you we kept all things common. They put everything in one pot. So here it is, he's confirming what we read in the Bible. But again, y'all don't care. You don't care. Why? Because it ain't no proof. It's stolen from Horace. Yeah, but the enemies of Christ, who we know existed, is talking about them. Ain't that something? But the same Egyptologists will believe in Alexander the Great, who took down Egypt and created the city of Alexandria, but yet we find more proof of Christ than Alexander the Great. Ain't that something? On record. And this is just a few things that we're going over. It's so much that I won't be able to talk about. But this is just to get your brains going, to get you to think that you've been deceived, to thinking that Christ is just made up. But anyway, it says Christian brother, this is on page 28, Christian brotherhood was an easy target for ridicule. So you see that? They said they were easy targets. It says like the founder, right? Talking about Christ. The Christians were homeless preachers who made what little money they needed from their revivals. Like the former, and like Paul, they led a life fraught with danger. Rejection was their common lot as fools for Christ. Wow, that sounds very familiar, because keep in mind you got Luke 9 and 58 talked about Christ, how he didn't have a place to lay his head, right? And then you have 2 Corinthians 11 verse 22 on down, talked about the dangers that he faced. So that's straight biblical. Straight biblical. Time for y'all to wake up. It's time for y'all to wake up. Alright? But then he's saying, as fools for Christ, they embraced the faith of Jesus willingly in the certainty that his triumph was their triumph, and that they would be raised up upon the last day. So they knew about the resurrection. Sounds like John chapter 6, verse, let me grab that, John chapter 6, verse 44. And I hope y'all writing these scriptures down. Even if you don't believe, look at it and see if it lines up with the scripture. John 6, all the pages stuck together. Verse 44, it says, no man can come to me except the Father which have sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. Sound just like the Bible. Ain't that something? Page 29. It says, most people are unable to follow any demonstrative argument consecutively, and hence need parables and benefit from them. Just as now we see these people called Christians, right? Because remember earlier that they were called Christians by the populace, all right? Drawing their faith from parables and miracles, and yet sometimes acting in the same way as those who practice philosophy. Now, when you look at Matthew chapter 13, real quick, Matthew chapter 13, verse 1, it says, the same day went Jesus out of the house and sat by the seaside. And remember earlier, Herod said he always spoke by the lake, right? And great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into a ship and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. And he spake many things to them in parables, saying, behold, a sower went forth to sow. So now I just wanted to show you that he spoke things in parables, illustrations, right? So look at verse 10. It says, and the disciples came and said to him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? Why are you talking to them in parables? Right? He answered and said unto them, because it is given to you to know the mysteries or hidden truths of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. All right. So yes, he spoke to them in parables. All right. Now let's go to page 36. It says, for selfs such as inconsistencies are fatal. Even Jesus' behavior was not becoming of a god. He was a sorcerer. You see what he called him? Called him a sorcerer. He flinched in the face of adversity. He was disrespectful of the customs of his people. One of hears of his eating habits. Does the body of a god need nourishment? So these were reasons why they said, I don't believe in him. Didn't they call him a glutton? Huh? Don't that sound like scripture? Didn't people accuse him of that? Let's read 2 chapters back. Matthew 11. Verse 19, it says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a man gluttonous. He always eating. And a wine bibber, and he always drinking. A friend of publicans and sinners, but wisdom justifies of the children. So you see that? I need y'all to wake up. It says, then began he to upbraid the cities wherein most of his mighty works were done, because they repented not. So he was going in. All right. So here it is. The enemies of Christ is writing about him, confirming the things that we read in what we call today the Bible, which is our record book. Let's grab 1 John chapter 5 right quick. 1 John chapter 5. I'm trying to stay out of the Bible because I'm using this as a secondary source. 1 John 5 and 10, it says, he that believeth on the Son of God hath witnessed in himself. He that believeth not God hath made him a liar, because he believeth not the record that God gave of his Son. What's the record that God gave of his Son? The Bible. And here it is, we reading things in the records that God gave about his Son, and we able to confirm these events that took place. It's time to wake up. It's too much proof out here to just sit and say, oh, well, I don't know if I believe that. And the same book here talks about Pliny the Younger as well. Those who got the book, read page 16. It's in there. No reason to lie. Get the book for yourself. But it's time for us to wake up. It's tons of proof of the Messiah, the Mashiach,